How are you this afternoon? Good? So I know we've all been sitting a little bit. Maybe we can just stretch a little bit, take a little tiny break here. So thank you so much for attending today. My name is Jennifer Nash. I just graduated from Case Western Reserve University with my PhD, and my doctoral research focused on executive coaching. So what I'm here today to talk to you about is the second study in my doctoral research, which looked at the relationship between coaching relationship quality and the actual coaching relationship using the relational climate scale. So how I'd like to kick this off is to better understand who we have in the audience today. So if you are a medical professional, if you could please raise your hand for me. Okay. And if you are a practicing executive coach or some type of coach, if you could raise your hand for me. Okay. And do we have any academics in the room today? Yes, okay. And do we have any industry professionals in the room today? Okay, all right, welcome. So that helps me better understand who I'm speaking with. So now it's your turn. What I'd like you to do is take out a piece of paper, and I'd like you to think about a current interpersonal relationship that you have, and I'd like you to actually draw that relationship for me. And I'll give you just a couple seconds to do that. Oh, yes, so I'd ask you to take out a piece of paper and a pen, and I'd like you to think about an interpersonal relationship that you currently have. And I'd ask you to draw that relationship on that piece of paper. So I'll give you just a couple seconds to do that. Just draw it out. Whatever that looks like to you conceptually, just draw it out.
Could you speak up just a little bit? Thank you.
Yes, is that better?
Much better.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. I try to speak loudly, but sometimes I'm told I have too soft of a voice, so I will try to project back to you. Mm-hmm. All right, so for those of you that have drawn what this relationship looks like to you, is there anyone that would like to volunteer to describe what they've drawn? They don't have to show the drawing, but if they'd like to describe what they've drawn, I would really appreciate that. Yes?
I feel like I'm always raising my hand. This is the drawing, and describe it, the emotion, or describe what?
Yeah, describe the relationship, what it means to you, what it looks like to you, how the interaction is.
Okay, well, it's a family member, and its communication is it's difficult with the person.
Okay.
And I have to bring mindfulness into the equation prior to interacting with the person, or I just become unconscious. So that's why I have this complicated. Yes. So,
yeah, there's a lot going on in the drawing, I see.
Yep. That's how it feels when I'm around the person. So.
Okay, very good, thank you. One other example.
Just to be clear, it's
Yes.
not about I was thinking about a coaching relationship when I drew the picture. It's not, that wasn't the question, was it? It was just any interpersonal relationship?
Any interpersonal relationship, yes. Yep. Yes, please.
So my two symbols are separated by a gap. They are similar, but not really. And there's, the points at which it's like a squiggle on both sides, and it would be impossible for them to connect.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So what I'm hearing is that there are some common themes. Maybe some of them are joyful, like we heard this morning. How can you infuse joy into your life, right? Maybe some of them could be enhanced in some way or refined so that they leave you in a better state, right? So maybe that could be this kind of theme or perhaps this kind of theme, right? But regardless of the current state of our relationships, what I think we could all agree on is that there's always room to improve them, right? And as anyone in a romantic relationship knows, there's always room for improvement, right? You're constantly working on this, right? So what if there were a way that you could improve your relationships? And this is exactly the question that I was asking as I started to look at my doctoral research. I wanted to better understand if there were a way that I could improve relationships, maybe in all destinations or dimensions of my life. If I could enhance my ability to connect with other people. And if I could strengthen my capacity to impact my client outcomes Or if I were a physician, to impact my patient outcomes. Or if I were an academic, to impact my student outcomes. What if that were possible? And so I set off on this journey to figure that out. And the question that I asked was, how is relational climate correlated with coaching relationship quality? And that was the subject of my second doctoral study. What I used as scales for the study are shown here below on the bottom of the slide. I don't know if y'all can read that, so I'll share them with you. On the left, we have what's called the Relational Climate Scale. And the Relational Climate Scale was developed in 2015 by Richard Boyatzis and Kylie Rochford at Case Western Reserve University. The Relational Climate Scale has 3 dimensions to it. They include shared vision, compassion, and relational energy. I used those as my independent variables for the study, for those of you that are familiar with quantitative research methods. In terms of my dependent variable for the study, I used a scale that was developed by Gregory and Levy in 2011 that has 4 dimensions to it. And those dimensions include genuineness, compassion, comfort, and development, facilitating development. So I interviewed 224 people through a survey. And once the results came out, what I found was that actually each dimension of that relational climate scale was positively and directly correlated with the quality of the coaching relationship. And this was exciting for those of us in academia because this is the first study to demonstrate that there is a direct and positive correlation between the relational climate dimensions, many of which include emotional intelligence capabilities, and the quality of the relationship. Now, those of us in practice, we know this intuitively. We feel this when we're in a coaching session or we have a physician and patient relationship. We know this. But for academia, this is the first time that we were able to demonstrate this empirically and with rigorous methodology. So what does this actually mean from a practitioner standpoint? What do we do with this? Well, if we are able to leverage the shared vision and the compassion and the relational energy in our coaching relationships, then the quality of that relationship may improve. So how does that work? Let's take a look at that a little bit more closely. So I'm going to first talk about relational climate scale, and I'm going to talk about shared vision, which is the first element of that scale. And I'm going to ask you to watch as I play the squares of images across the screen. And I'd like you to think about that relationship that you brought up in the initial part of our conversation and see if anything in that relationship you can resonate with what's showing up on the screen, okay? So this one says how the customer explained it. The next one, how the project leader understood it. How the engineer designed it. How the programmer wrote it. This one's my favorite. How the sales executive described it, right? How the project was documented. What operations installed. How the customer was billed. How the help desk supported it. And what the customer really needed. So as you think about those relationships that you initially were asked to think about at the beginning of our conversation, are any of these dimensions included in those relationships, perhaps why they aren't working in the ways that you would like them to work? Perhaps there's some explanation gaps. Perhaps there are some shared vision or understanding gaps. Perhaps there is a question or a dilemma about the description that's involved, right? And in what ways have you experienced these differences with other clients or other patients or other colleagues in your life? Just take a moment and reflect on that, where that comes up for you. So as I leave you thinking with that, I'll move on to the next dimension of emotional intelligence in the study, which is compassion. So for compassion, who exemplifies compassion to you, and why do they exemplify compassion? Would anyone be open to sharing? Someone? Yes.
My husband.
Your husband exemplifies compassion, and why is that?
Because no matter how
Yeah, no matter how crazy you are, he still loves you. Good. Yeah. Others? What if I say Mother Teresa? Does that ring any bells for anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see lots of heads nodding and shaking, right? What is it about Mother Teresa that when I say compassion, what do you equate with that?
There's a selflessness about it.
Yeah, she's selfless, right? There's a kindness there. There's a caring for others. So when we talk about compassion, that's what we're talking about. How do you demonstrate compassion in your life? Might there be space for you to be more compassionate with yourself and with others in your life? I see lots of heads nodding.
I
Yes.
think the thing you just said about self-compassion is a big deal for me.
Yes.
Compassion for other people is okay. I do feel, until I forget about me.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting component you brought up.
I think that is a common frequency. And so I'm not a medical professional, so I can't comment on it from that perspective, but I know personally, I also struggle with that. Having the compassion for myself when I would treat someone in a certain way, but not treat myself in that same kind way. Absolutely. Thank you. So let's move on to the third component of our study, which was relational energy. So here what I'd like you to do is think of a person with whom you interact regularly. What do they say? What do they do? What type of energy do they bring to your interaction? If you stop and think about that for a moment. How do interactions with this person affect your energy? Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, how do they affect your energy? Think about what energy you as a coach or a physician or an academic, or as a husband or a wife or a mother or a son or a daughter, are bringing to your interactions. Might there be an opportunity to intentionally shift the type of emotion that you are bringing into that interaction and perhaps then change the outcome and enhance the relationship? How does that relational energy impact your performance and your outcomes? And how could it impact it if that energy were shifted? So I don't think we have time to do this, but what I wanted to show you was a video, and I'm sure most of you in this room know this video. This is the speech that Martin Luther King gave about I Have a Dream. And when you think about this speech, and I wish we had time, but he exemplifies these three dimensions of the relational climate scale in wonderful fashion. So he's talking about, I have this dream. I have this dream for me. I have this dream for my children. I have this dream for the world. And so as he's talking, he's using these dimensions of energy in the tone of his voice, the cadence of his speech. He's using compassion and saying that I resonate with you. I understand what you're going through. He's using that shared vision to say, will you please come along on this journey with me? Do we have the same goal? Are we looking at the same preferred outcome? So if you have time, I would offer, take a look at that when you have a moment and just think about these things that we've talked about today. So what I'd like to leave you with are some key takeaways from my doctoral research in the three areas of the relational climate scale. So for shared vision, what do you define as shared vision in your relationship? There's an academic definition of it from the scale, but I'd like you to think about what you would define that as. And then the person that you're interacting with, do you have that same shared vision? Are you working towards the same goals, or are you here and this person's here, or are you here and they're way over here and didn't realize there was a goal? What does that look like? Or a preferred outcome? How can you incorporate shared visions into your relationships if it isn't there already? In terms of compassion, which compassionate actions have you observed from others? Perhaps even today in the hotel. Have you seen any? Where could you show additional compassion in your relationships? In terms of relational energy, consider what type of energy you are infusing into your relationships on a daily basis. Reflect on how and to what extent you could better energize those interactions, maybe in a positive direction or maybe in a more understanding direction, so there won't be those disjointed lines and there won't be that disconnect between the two faces on your drawing. What might that look like? What I'd like to share as my last point is a story that I had from one of my interviews. And the woman was a director of pharmacy in a large hospital in Southern Maryland. And she had worked a 15-hour day. And she was actually the rabbi's wife. And the rabbi called her and said, honey, I have this patient who is critically ill. They're on the top floor of the hospital. They are all by themselves. And I need you to go up and I need you to spend some time with this person. Now, the director of the pharmacy, she was exhausted. It had been a really long day. Her kids were waiting for her. Dinner wasn't ready. You know, I'm sure these all resonate for you, right? And so she said, okay, sweetheart, I will go up and I will sit with this person. And so she goes upstairs and she finds that this woman is literally on her deathbed and she is by herself. And so she takes her hand and she's patting her hand and she's telling her, you know, just giving her some comfort, right? Showing her some compassion. And all of a sudden the woman opens her eyes and says, honey, it was like the blink of an eye. And she closes her eyes and she dies. And so the rabbi's wife, of course, she's visibly moved, and I'm bawling as she's telling me this, and I'm not supposed to be doing that, but I was. And so I said, what did you do in that moment? And she said, I was still, and I was so glad that I had taken that moment to show that kindness to someone who was alone in their last moments when I was so tired and focused on me. But I turned that around and focused it on them, and they were comforted. And in doing so, I was comforted. So perhaps think about how you can bring that compassion to different inner areas in your life. And I will close there and ask for questions. Thank you.